Thanks for joining me. I'm sitting here in my home office on the floodplain in downtown Calgary. Yes, we did flood in 2013, so this topic is close to my heart. Let's get straight into it here. We're looking at a map of upper air over North America. Here's Alberta and British Columbia, and winds up at about 5 kilometers above the earth there. We can see this yellow zone here off the BC coast. This is an upper level low pressure system that's circulating counterclockwise, and we've got a clockwise circulating upper level high. The high is on top of the low, and it's causing this sort of backwards S shape in the jet stream. This is what we call sort of a Rex block pattern. But that's going to break down in the coming days as this upper low starts to shift inwards here into Western North America. It's moving very slowly and becomes a very kind of classic setup for heavy precipitation in southern Alberta. Now, Alberta's wettest month is June. In Calgary, we average about 112 millimeters of rain in the month of June. We've only had about 20 so far this month, so it's been very dry out there, but that's likely going to change very quickly. As like I say, slow moving upper level low here. And this causes air to rise in the atmosphere in a number of different ways, but one of the main ways here is once we get it kind of, moving inland, to get low pressure that forms and draws moist air in the lower levels of the atmosphere, forcing it up the slope of the land in southern Alberta and bringing us enhanced heavy precipitation. Alberta is a flood-prone region because of that. We get these sort of setups that bring that moist air up the slope of the land, which causes heavy precipitation and the potential for river flooding. And so that's what we're seeing here. In fact, we're looking at the precipitable water map here, and you can see that as this system really gets going, it starts to draw from sort of a reservoir of moisture in the north central states, pulling it back into the terrain here in Alberta and forcing it up the slope of the land. So that's really going to be what's driving the heavy precipitation rates in southern Alberta. Now, looking how this system sort of evolves through time, we can see it starts out with some sort of heavy precipitation there Friday, rain really ramping up throughout the day on Friday, with that upslope easterly flow here in much of southwestern Alberta, in particular along the terrain there. And it really kind of ramps up on Saturday with the heavier precipitation rates kind of throughout the day on Saturday, and changing over to snow in the higher elevations on Saturday as well. So into the mountain parks there, and pretty much all the way along the spine of the continent, down the Rockies here and in through southwestern Alberta, southeast BC at higher elevations, likely going to be seeing some heavy snow and heavy rain also pushing out into Saskatchewan as that system moves east early Sunday. Also going to be seeing some fairly strong winds developing on Saturday across southern Alberta. Here, this product showing upwards of 70, even 80 kilometer an hour gusts in parts of southern Alberta throughout the day on Saturday. Now, that could have some impact, certainly minor damage possible. But one of the things to consider, if our soils really start to become saturated from the rain, it doesn't take as much wind to topple trees over. So we could look, in some areas, in some cases, we may be seeing the risk of some uprooted trees with wind gusts like this. Certainly bears watching. But some of our precipitation totals that we're going to be seeing, fairly substantial here. So this is here is the European ensemble, and it's showing our bullseye of heaviest precipitation in southwestern Alberta there, with heavy precipitation across much of the plains of southern Alberta, getting into west central Saskatchewan. We're also going to be seeing kind of adjacent areas of southeastern BC with lots of rain compared to the Canadian. A little bit heavier precipitation here on the Canadian ensemble as of right now, and slightly further north with that heavy precipitation bullseye. And that's kind of similar when we get over to the GFS. This is the American ensemble here. We can see heavier precipitation forecast to the west of Calgary, sort of in that Kananaskis country area. So when you see that sort of a agreement between the models in the zones of where the heavy precipitation is and just how much rain or precipitation we're going to see in the end, you start to get higher confidence that that's sort of what you might end up seeing. But not all of this precipitation is going to fall as rain. Like I say, in the higher elevations, a lot of that is going to be falling as snow. And if we look at the river basin here, this is the Saskatchewan River Basin, and that it comprises several sub-basins here in Alberta, from the North Saskatchewan to the Red Deer to the Bow to the Oldman. And the Milk is a little bit further to the south there. But, wherever all that heavy precipitation falls, it's going to have, varying levels of impact on those different basins. So, if we look at some of our individual models here, this is the Canadian RDPS model at 18 Zulu, so 12 noon on Wednesday. This model kind of showing the heaviest precipitation falling west and northwest of Calgary. A lot of that's sort of, getting up to close to 150 millimeters of rain there. That's kind of more impacting the Bow and Red Deer River basins here. Whereas if you go over to the European model here, most of that rain is being forecast in the sort of Oldman and even part of the Milk River basins here, with a little bit less in terms of rainfall totals. These forecast precipitation models, precipitation is one of the hardest metrics for weather models to capture. So that's why you're seeing some of this variation. We are still a couple days out as well, but in general, it looks like significant precipitation across much of southwestern Alberta. One of the considerations, though, like I say, is likely seeing snow over higher elevations. This will be a cold rain in high elevations, but I was talking about all that moisture that's kind of streaming in. We're looking at dew point temperature here now, just sort of a measure of moisture in the air. A lot of moisture streaming into the system from the east, but a lot of dry air also getting pulled down on the backside of the system. What that dry air can do as it kind of mixes into the system here is actually cause rapid evaporative cooling and cause the temperatures to fall as heavy precipitation falls, making snow more likely. And so I suspect it's possible that snow could actually start to move east of the mountains and, get into some of the higher elevation areas, perhaps, dare I say, even close to the city of Calgary, late Saturday, perhaps early Sunday. Could we see snow near Calgary on the first weekend of summer? Remains to be seen, but certainly a couple of models showing a lot of snow. The European model here, again, showing upwards of sort of 60, 70 centimeters in the higher terrain of Kananaskis country, and as well through the mountain parks down into Waterton Glacier here. But the NAM, what is going on with the NAM? Again, this is just a thought experiment, but the NAM is showing heavy snow getting right into the Calgary area, close to a foot just west of the city, and even north of Calgary towards sort of Red Deer and northwards, heavily accumulating snow. So again, this just shows you, look at the variance between these two, okay? This seems far more realistic. Canadian and European are really showing that snow remaining in the higher terrain with slightly warmer temperatures. But if we get a lot more dry air flowing in the back side of the system, we could be seeing that snow pushing out a little bit further east into the terrain. Certainly would not expect something like this, but I've never seen a weather forecast model showing this much snow in the month of June in Alberta. Again, a thought experiment, and how that looks here on spot weather. This is the Canadian again, showing no snow in the city of Calgary, but a whopping 102 millimeters of rain by the end of the day on Saturday. And like I say, that's just one forecast, but that's a lot of rain. That's almost a month's worth of rain in a day. And that's why we could be considering, flood potential in the coming days. But if we look at the NAM again, the NAM is showing less rain, 67 millimeters of rain, but 22 centimeters of snow in the city of Calgary. Again, thought experiment, unlikely to happen, but certainly something to consider. We're going to be seeing snow over higher elevation areas west of Calgary, and some of that could get close to the city. It remains to be seen. Stay tuned to forecasts. But nonetheless, that amount of heavy, wet snow west of the city, depending on how low it gets into the lower elevations, could be highly impactful. With the trees fully in leaf, we could be seeing damage to trees, perhaps even power infrastructure with that level of snow. So something to consider. Snow will certainly be a part of this system, at least over the higher terrain. Now, temperatures as well, likely with this system, like I say, it's going to be a cold rain. It's going to get cold in behind. Single-digit temperatures there through perhaps Saturday into Sunday across parts of Alberta. Really concerned about how cool it could get, actually, especially if we have snow across parts of the landscape there. We could be seeing, cold temperatures approaching the freezing mark over higher elevations west of Calgary. Hopefully no frosts, but temperatures in the low single digits here, perhaps. As skies clear out, the air is quite dry. Luckily, the night length is at the minimum this time of the year, but certainly something to be, keeping an eye on. We've in past systems where we've seen heavy rain and that's kind of transitioned to snow, we've seen frosts following these type of systems before. So hopefully not going to be seeing much in the way of frost, but that's something to watch for, especially Sunday night and even Monday night with colder temperatures following this system. Now, let's talk about how this event is going to compare with something like 2013. That'll sort of help conceptualize what could be coming with this event and make sort of sense of all the different factors. 2013 had a number of different antecedent conditions compared to 2025. This event does not look at all like 2013 in many ways. First of all, this picture here I took today on June 18th, looking west from my balcony toward the Rockies there. We've got Glasgow, Cornwall, Outlaw, and Banded. Very, not much snow on these peaks. And typically you'd see a lot more snow at this time of the year on these peaks. Now, 2013, there was a lot more snow at this time. In fact, if we look at the Little Elbow Snow Pillow, which is in the Elbow River headwaters west of Calgary, Around this time in June, we had, 150 millimeters or so of snow water equivalent out there in the mountains. And compare that with this year, we haven't had any snow on that snow pillow really for the last week or so. So one of the big concerns about 2013 was that rain on snow event, right? You have these high freezing levels, warm rain falling on all of that snow. It rapidly melts, runs off, especially because we had sort of saturated soils, perhaps even frozen soils in the Alpine. And a lot of that water ran off. And of course, this also was a very significantly heavy precipitation event. We had in excess of 300 millimeters of rain that fell in those areas. So quite a bit different from the 2013 event in those ways as well. With this much snow being forecast with this event, that's more slow release water. And so it's not all going to be running off. It'll sort of hold that water and release it a little bit more slowly. So there's the runoff issues off that steep terrain west of Calgary, a little bit less likely to be a big problem this year. Again, we'll have to see how it plays out. But the snow is more of a slow release water, and it's not warm rain on heavy snow like we saw in 2013. Another thing this year, right now, this is percent of normal soil moisture. We're a little bit drier than normal across much of southern Alberta. There are some areas that are closer to normal in south central sections of the province, but a lot of Saskatchewan's quite dry. And but we're not super dry. Like, the last 30 days, yes, it's been dry out there, but we have had scattered precipitation. What can happen when it's very dry is actually the soil can become hydrophobic or water repellent, and heavy bursts of rain or even sort of moderate rains don't tend to percolate as well when the soils are water repellent. And we're not quite at that point. So what I think is likely happening out there is these soils are going to be very receptive to the rains that are coming, at least in the prairies to the east there. And they'll soak up a lot of that water, given sort of the long-term drought that we've been in here and, those soil moisture conditions. As well, another factor in 2013, we had really moist soils across much of the U.S. plains, the Midwest. This year. This is our soil moisture anomaly, and these oranges are where, it's below normal soil moisture in these regions. And that was a major driver in the amount of water that kind of entered that storm system in 2013. We have less moisture sort of through, that's being released through evapotranspiration into the atmosphere. So we're going to have less moisture availability overall with this storm system, even though it is a fairly slow moving storm and we will see substantial precipitation. It's drier overall upstream. So that's going to be another factor. Something else that we're looking at here, of course, is this is a river gauge on the Elbow River just upstream of the Glenmore Reservoir. This blue trace here is where we are, and in that gray there is where we should be. So our stream flow is very low across much of southern Alberta, and that means our streams with the low stream flow could take a lot more water before we start to approach flood stage. So that's another buffer out there on the landscape. And speaking of low river flows, we're seeing these water shortages advisories across much of the southern half of the province. It's actually starting to be a little bit concerning. So this event will be, offering some benefits in many ways. Certainly a godsend ahead of the summertime. So that's quite concerning there. And if we look at our, drought stages, drought stage 3, which is severe drought there in southern Alberta and our Oldman and Milk River basins. We're in stage 2 here in Calgary. And, it's quite dry across much of the province. So this is certainly not like a 2013 where we had these antecedent heavy precipitation events that had the soils already saturated. This time our soils are not saturated at all. They can take in a lot of rain, especially if it doesn't come all, at a really rapid rate. If it's kind of more moderate, the soils will be able to, we'll see a lot more infiltration into the soils, and that will offer some benefits. And like I say, because our reservoirs and streams are already quite low out there, like well below normal stream flows, especially after the past winter there with the well below normal snowpack, those are going to be buffers against major flooding this time around. Of course, another difference from 2013, the Springbank Off-Stream Reservoir. This is a dry reservoir here off the Elbow River west of Calgary. And we've had some other flood mitigation infrastructure projects completed. The province has spent millions of dollars since 2013 trying to mitigate against floods in the future. And, this project combined with the gates being installed on Glenmore Dam and some of the berms that have been built on the sort of the Bow River across Calgary in different areas of southern Alberta, that's going to certainly help mitigate a 1 in 100 year type flood that we saw in 2013. And we're certainly not expecting that magnitude of an event, at least right now. We are still seeing some variance in the models, but in general, again, like I say, we've got lots of buffers against, say, a 2013. In fact, here, on the province's website, alberta.ca, we can see, like a 1 in 100 year flood is going to cause flooding in these red zones here through, this is Britannia, Roxborough, Victoria Park, Stampede Park, all this area here in central Calgary along the Elbow. Since these projects have been completed, this is where you're going to be seeing the sort of flood hazard. It'll be just right locally along the Elbow River there. So big differences this year compared to 2013 in terms of flood risk in the city of Calgary, both due to some of the changes that we've made in infrastructure, but also due to some of the characteristics of the land surface and how much precipitation is falling compared to 2013. Now, again, one other, bad year for flooding was 2005. In June, we had 4 major precipitation events and 3 floods. Now, what's interesting was June 1st to 4th was the primer event, and we had upwards of 140 millimeters in sort of the bullseye of the precipitation that year with that event in southwestern Alberta. And so, we didn't see much in the way of flooding with that. Even though that much rain came, it came following, that was during a multi-year drought, sort of like the one that we're in now. 1999 to 2005 was very dry. So that first event, it was very heavy, but it didn't cause much in the way of flooding because the Earth's surface was a lot more receptive to receiving a lot of water. So again, that could be sort of like an analogy, analogous to this event in many ways. The setup looks quite similar. So that offers a little bit of peace of mind. However, it was the primer for 3 other major rainfall events that did lead to flooding. And so if we do see any subsequent heavy rainfall events after this one, then we could start looking at some significant flooding problems in southern Alberta. But for now, again, I do like how this looks in terms of, we've got lots of buffers out there on the landscape. So the question remains, hazardous or beneficial with this event? Well, I think we're going to be seeing a little bit of both, of course. Let's start with the benefits. Increased stream flow and reservoir levels, of course, is good news because we've got well below normal stream flow in southern Alberta and water shortages out there. And, we're not really going to be seeing, you don't tend to see significant changes in groundwater recharge. You don't see the water table come up rapidly with these type of events. You tend to need several back-to-back and over months and even years to see those sort of wells start filling back up, and the groundwater takes a long time to percolate back down into the earth, especially with how thirsty the earth is right now. But certainly good news in terms of temporary increases in stream flow and reservoir levels, and it's going to recharge the soil moisture ahead of the summer. Still looking at likely a drier than average and a hotter than average July and August. So this is certainly, like I say, a godsend for the agricultural sector in Western Canada. Much of southern Alberta is irrigation. The irrigation lands, our irrigation districts are east and southeast of Calgary, north of Lethbridge there. Lots of agricultural activity there. So this is good news for both the dryland farming and for reducing the demand in those irrigation districts. So certainly beneficial in terms of rain in those areas. However, when we look over at the hazards, there's going to be excess runoff that'll lead to swollen rivers and streams. And, that can obviously cause problems in low-lying areas. We'll be seeing flooding possible in those poorly drained areas. Some roads could get flooded, backed up storm drains, especially if you've got clogged gutters that are full of debris. And flooded basements are usually one of the biggest problems with these type of events. So we're certainly going to be watching for that in the coming days. There's lots of things you can do to sort of try to prevent that from happening. And one good place I would recommend visiting here is calgary.ca. They have their heavy rain and flooding page, and they talk about how you can reduce impacts for flooding, what you can do in your home, like installing a backflow prevention device or a sump pump, and of course outside doing things like cleaning out your gutters and pointing your downspouts away from the house and not toward your neighbor's house, no matter how much you may dislike them. Nobody wants a flooded basement. So, there's lots of good tips on here. There's another really valuable tool here, floods.alberta.ca. You can look at anywhere in Alberta here to see where the flood risk is. Here in downtown Calgary, you can see now, and this kind of takes into account the recent upgrades to our flood infrastructure. And you can see, where do you live in Calgary? Do you live on the floodplain? In a 1 in 100 year event now, you're only going to be seeing flooding in these areas. According to this flood mapping product, it takes a 1 in 500 year flood now to get flooding at my house, 1 in 200 year flood for other parts of downtown. But in general, we've seen some improvements here. And along the Bow, you tend to flood those sort of low elevation islands like Prince's Island, St. George's Island. You get down into, Beaver Dam Flats and Carburn Park. Those tend to flood along the bow, but certainly a very handy tool to see where you live in Calgary. Do you have the risk of river flooding there? And of course, one final thing you can look at is getprepared.ca and check out, how to prepare for floods. Lots of good information here. So basically, in sum, this system likely to be bringing some hazardous conditions out there. Like I say, at least minor flooding in some areas, considering the potential for some strong wind gusts through Saturday that could have some impacts, as well as heavy snow potential west of Calgary and the higher terrain of the mountains. We're going to have to watch out for that. So there will certainly be impacts associated with this, but we can't discount the potential for the benefits that are going to be coming with this system, with heavy rain over, a really sort of drought-stricken land here in southern Alberta. Even if it doesn't seem like it's very green out there, we've been seeing a gradual drawdown of the water of our streams and lakes over several years here. So, hopefully this is the start of a trend in the right direction. Thanks a lot for joining me. We'll talk to you next time.